The sound was small, fragile, almost impossible to hear, but it stopped Gabriel stone cold in the doorway. His black coat still carried the metallic scent of gunpowder. Blood, not his own, stained the edge of his cufflinks. His briefcase hung forgotten from fingers that had just signed a man's death warrant an hour ago. For a heartbeat, the most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast couldn't breathe. His twin sons, the children who had never spoken a word, never taken a single step, were reaching toward the Maid. Scarlett knelt on the marble floor, arms outstretched, her auburn hair falling loose around her shoulders. Her voice was low, steady, a lullaby Gabriel hadn't heard since Catherine died in that hospital room 2 years ago. Ethan's trembling hand stretched toward her. Lucas's lips parted again, a second syllable shattering the mansion's eternal silence. Ma, not a cry, not a reflex, a word. The boys were moving, crawling, reaching. Not toward Gabriel, not toward the $3,000 an hour therapists, not toward the army of specialists he'd hired. Toward her, toward the Maid he barely knew existed 3 weeks ago. Gabriel's heart slammed against his ribs like a caged animal. He had built Stone Manor to be silent, controlled, impenetrable, a fortress against grief, against hope, against everything that could hurt him again. Every room was monitored. Every person was vetted. Every emotion was buried 6 feet deep alongside his wife. And yet here, in his own living room, the impossible was happening. His sons, once trapped in stillness, once written off by every doctor in the country, were calling someone mama. Scarlett didn't look back. She stayed perfectly still, whispering, coaxing, as if any sudden movement might shatter this moment like glass. Her yellow cleaning gloves lay discarded beside her. Forgotten. She wasn't the Maid anymore. She was something else entirely. Gabriel's grip tightened on the briefcase, the leather creaking under fingers that had choked the life out of men without trembling. Those same fingers now shook. Everything he thought he knew about his children, about control, about what could or couldn't be healed, about the walls he'd built so carefully around his broken heart, was crumbling right there on the polished floor. The Silent King, they called him. The man whose whisper could end empires. The man who hadn't shed a tear at his own wife's funeral. That man stood frozen in the doorway of his own home, watching a stranger give his sons what he never could. And he hadn't even stepped inside the room yet. If this story satisfies you, smash that like button, it means the world to us. Share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. And subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because this is just the beginning. Gabriel stepped back 1 pace, then another, until the darkness of the corridor swallowed him completely. He didn't go into the room. He couldn't. His legs felt as if they'd been nailed to the cold marble floor, and he simply stood there in the dark, watching like a stranger in his own home. Scarlett rose slowly. So gently it was as if she made no sound at all. She lifted Ethan first, settled the little boy into the crib on the left, her hand patting his back lightly as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Then came Lucas, still clinging to her collar, refusing to let go. Scarlett bent down, murmured something Gabriel couldn't quite hear, and Lucas released his grip, letting her lay him in the crib. Then she sang. Her voice was low, soft as breath, a wordless melody Gabriel had never heard before, but it tightened his throat. It was like the way Catherine used to sing, the way she used to soothe him on nights when he couldn't sleep, the way she used to say everything would be all right. For 2 years, this house hadn't known the sound of a lullaby. For 2 years, he'd believed that sound had died with his wife. Gabriel wanted to step in. He wanted to run to his children, gather them into his arms, tell them their father was here, their father was always here. But his feet wouldn't move. Something clenched around his chest. A bitter sensation that took him a few seconds to recognize for what it was. Jealousy. He was jealous of the Maid. She'd only been here 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And he had been here for 2 years. In this very house. Fewer than 50 steps from his son's room. Yet they'd never reached for him. Never once moved their lips to call him by any word at all. He looked down at his hands. There was still dried blood beneath his nails from tonight's meeting. These hands had tightened around a traitor's throat until the man stopped breathing. These hands had signed death orders without trembling for even a second. And yet these same hands had never held his sons properly. Not once had he let them curl their fingers around his the way Lucas had just held Scarlett's hand. He was a coward. The most powerful king on the east coast of the United States. The man whose name made the entire underworld flinch. Didn't dare step into his own children's room. Scarlett switched off the light, leaving only the gentle glow of a star-shaped night lamp. She turned and walked toward the door. Gabriel held his breath, retreating deeper into the darkness. She passed right by him, less than a meter away, carrying the clean scent of baby wash and a faint trace of lavender. She didn't see him. Her footsteps faded, then disappeared at the end of the hall. Gabriel stayed there a long while, staring into the dim nursery, where his 2 sons slept peacefully for the first time in many weeks without needing sedatives. Then he turned and walked back to his office. The oak door closed behind him with its familiar click. He didn't turn on the light. He simply sat down in the leather chair behind his desk and lifted the phone. Marcus answered after 2 rings. Gabriel spoke, his voice as low and cold as it always was, but with something different in it. A fracture only those who knew him too well would notice. Investigate the new maid. Everything about her. Don't miss a single detail. He hung up without waiting for Marcus to respond. Then he sat there in the dark, alone. Ma. The sound kept echoing in his head like a broken record, repeating the same fragment again and again until it drove him mad. It clung to him, haunted him, exactly the way Catherine's voice still lingered in his nightmares every night. And Gabriel Stone, the silent king, the man who had never cried in front of anyone, sat alone in a room black as ink and felt something inside his chest beginning to crack. The next morning, Gabriel woke with bloodshot eyes and a dull, throbbing headache. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, that sound rose again. Ma, like a wordless sentence passed down on his failure. He put on a black suit as he did every day, knotted his tie with the mechanical motions of long habit, and went downstairs. Instead of turning right toward the dining room as usual, he turned left, toward the east wing of the estate, the part of the house he had avoided for 2 years. The nursery. The door was slightly open, and Gabriel stopped at the threshold. Scarlett was inside with her back to him, folding a neat stack of clothes so tiny they looked unreal on the changing table. Her auburn brown hair was tied back at the nape of her neck, bearing the curve of her throat and her narrow shoulders in a simple uniform. She didn't know he was there. As she worked, she spoke softly to the 2 children in their cribs, her voice light as a passing breeze. Ethan, today we'll wear the blue shirt, the same blue as your eyes. And Lucas, you like white better, don't you? I remember. Gabriel stepped in, his heel striking the wooden floor with a dry, sharp sound. Scarlett spun around, wide brown eyes flaring with surprise. She clearly hadn't expected to see him here, in the room where, according to whispers in the household, the master had never once set foot. What are you doing in here? Gabriel asked, his voice cold and level, the same tone he used when he interrogated someone. Scarlett set down the shirt in her hands and straightened, but she didn't step back. Nurse Rachel allowed me in starting last week, sir. She said they needed an extra pair of hands for small tasks. Gabriel moved 1 step closer, then another, until he stood only a few feet from her. At this distance, he could see a few loose strands of hair on her forehead, could see the way she swallowed but still didn't drop her gaze. You talk to them, he said. Not a question. Yes. Scarlett answered, her calm almost unnerving. Because no one else does. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Gabriel felt anger flare in his chest, the familiar emotion he often used to cover everything else. He moved closer still, close enough that Scarlett had to lift her chin to meet his eyes. Most people would tremble in this position. Most people would step back, apologize, beg. You were hired to clean, Gabriel said slowly, each word weighed and measured. Stay within your limits. Scarlett didn't move. She held his gaze, and Gabriel realized those brown eyes weren't afraid. They carried something else, something deeper, something sadder, but absolutely not fear. They don't understand contracts or boundaries, sir, she said, her voice still even, yet oddly heavy with meaning. They only understand presence. Gabriel ground his teeth. Do you know who I am? I do, Scarlett replied without hesitation. You're Gabriel Stone. People call you the Silent King. You run half the east coast of the United States, and in this house, everyone is afraid of you. She paused for a beat, then went on, softer now, but each word like a blade cutting into flesh. But to the children, you're only the man who never comes into their room. Gabriel went still. He had been shot, stabbed, had endured tortures most ordinary people couldn't even imagine. But no bullet, no knife had ever struck as true as what this girl had just said. She was right. He knew she was right, and that hurt more than any wound he had ever carried on his body. In the crib, Ethan waved his little hands, making a babbling sound as if he were trying to say something. Lucas turned his head toward them, wide eyes following a conversation he couldn't understand. Gabriel looked at his son, then looked back at Scarlett. She was still standing there, not retreating a single step, not apologizing, not begging to keep her job. She simply stood there between him and the children, like a small wall that couldn't be breached. He should fire her. Immediately. No one was allowed to speak to him like that and keep their life, let alone their employment. But Gabriel said nothing. He only turned and walked out of the room, his heels tapping an even rhythm on the wood floor. He didn't look back. And he didn't fire her. Because deep inside, in the place he had tried to bury long ago, Gabriel knew she had spoken the one thing no one dared say. The one thing he himself had never dared admit to himself. He had abandoned his children, and a stranger, a maid, had seen straight through him in only 3 weeks. That night, Gabriel couldn't sleep. Scarlett's words kept drilling into his mind like an unrelenting bit, boring deeper with every passing minute. You're only the man who never comes into their room. He lay on the king-sized bed in the master bedroom, the ceiling soaring high above him, black as ink, and still sleep wouldn't come. Near 2 in the morning, he gave up. He slipped on a black silk robe and went barefoot down to his private office on the 1st floor. The room was pitch dark, with only moonlight leaking through a gap in the curtains, laying faint streaks across the wooden floor. Gabriel didn't turn on the lamp. He sat in the leather chair behind his desk, and his gaze settled on the only framed photograph in this room. Catherine. The picture had been taken on their wedding day, 7 years ago. She wore white, her golden hair softly curled over her shoulders, her sea-blue eyes smiling at him through the lens. She was breathtaking. She had been the only light in his dark world, and he had lost her. Memory crashed over him like a tidal wave, dragging him down into that fateful night 2 years ago. The largest private hospital in New York, a special delivery suite on the 12th floor. Catherine lay on the bed, her face pale, sweat slicking her forehead. She was carrying twins at 28 weeks, too early, too dangerous. Complications. The word fell from the doctor's mouth like a death sentence. Gabriel gripped his wife's hand, the hand that had crushed a man's throat without trembling, and yet now it shook like a leaf. Catherine looked at him, her blue eyes already beginning to dim, yet still holding a strange, fierce strength. Promise me, she whispered, her voice weak as breath. Don't let the darkness swallow our children. Love them, Gabriel. Be with them. He nodded, unable to speak because his throat had gone tight and hard. He would do anything she wanted, anything. Then everything turned to chaos. Machines shrieked. Doctors and nurses rushed in like a white storm. Someone pulled his hand away, shoved him aside. He heard a doctor say in a strained voice, "We can only save one, the mother or the babies. Mr. Stone has to decide now." Gabriel froze. The world around him seemed to stop. But before he could even open his mouth, Catherine screamed, her voice splitting with pain, yet mercilessly decisive. "Save the children, save the children." Those were the last words she ever spoke to him. What came after was a blurred chain of images in his memory. The thin, fragile cries of 2 premature babies. The monitor shifting from steady rhythm to a terrifying straight line. A doctor saying the children lived but had severe neurological damage, that they might never walk, might never speak, and Catherine's hand in his, turning from warm to ice cold, from soft to rigid. He stood there in the delivery room thick with the smell of blood and antiseptic, one hand holding the hand of his dead wife, his ears filled with the cries of the children she had traded her life to bring into the world. Gabriel blinked and returned to the present. Catherine's photograph still smiled at him through the glass. The moonlight had shifted, now striking the frame directly like a ghostly spotlight. He lifted his hand and touched the cold glass, traced the curve of her lips in the picture. "You told me not to let the darkness swallow our children," he whispered, his voice rough in the empty night. "But Catherine, I'm the darkness. I can't look at them without seeing you. I can't hold them without remembering you died because of them. I broke my promise to you. And now a stranger, a maid, is doing what I should have done." The room sank into silence. Gabriel sat there alone with the photograph of the dead and the weight of a promise that had never been kept. 3 days had passed since the night Gabriel sat alone in his office, whispering to the photograph of his dead wife. 3 days in which he tried to shove everything out of his mind, to bury his feelings deep the way he always had. But Scarlett's words still haunted him, tangled with the promise he had once made to Catherine, twisting into a spiral with no exit. On the 3rd night, Gabriel couldn't sleep. The clock read nearly 1 in the morning when he decided to make a patrol, an old habit from the days when he had to protect his territory with his own hands. Stone Manor lay silent in the dark, and only his footsteps sounded softly across the cold marble. He passed the sitting room, the library, the long, hollow corridor, then stopped when he saw a faint glow slipping through the crack beneath the nursery door. Someone was in there at 1 in the morning. Gabriel moved closer. The door was open just enough for him to see inside without being noticed. Scarlett sat on the floor between the 2 cribs, legs folded beneath her, back straight. On her lap lay a small notebook wrapped in navy cloth, and she was writing inside it with a short, worn-down pencil. The soft nightlight fell over her auburn-brown hair, casting a warm halo around her. She set the pencil down, reached through the crib slats, and placed her palm on Lucas's chest. Her lips moved as she counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then she wrote something again in the notebook. She was counting his son's breaths. Gabriel stood there, frozen in the darkness, unable to look away. Scarlett stopped writing, tipped her head back, and began to sing. There were no words, only a gentle melody, rising and falling like water threading its way over stones. The sound spread through the room like a soft blanket, wrapping itself around the two sleeping children. Lucas shifted, his lips moving as if he were dreaming something pleasant. Ethan's breathing evened out, his chest lifting and falling in a steady rhythm. She sang for a few more minutes, then stood, so lightly she seemed to make almost no sound at all. She bent down and blew a kiss onto each child's forehead through the crib bars, whispering something Gabriel couldn't hear. Then she slipped out of the room and headed toward the back door used by the staff. She didn't see Gabriel standing in the darkness at the corner of the hallway. He waited until her footsteps faded and vanished, and only then did he step into the nursery. The room still carried a faint trace of lavender, perhaps from the oil she used. His gaze swept over the two cribs where his son slept in peace, then stopped on the armchair by the window. The cloth-covered notebook. She had forgotten it on the chair. Gabriel hesitated for a second, then went over and picked it up. The fabric cover was slightly worn at the corners, proof it had been used often. He opened it, and what he read stole his breath. Day 5. Ethan followed my hand when I folded the blanket. 3.2 seconds, the longest so far. Clear progress. Day 12. Lucas responds to a C major melody. Breathing slows by 12% when I sing in this key. Remember, use C major for bedtime. Day 18. Both turned their heads when they heard my voice calling. Not a reflex. Intentional. They recognize me. Day 21. They aren't broken. They aren't vegetative children like the doctors said. They're only waiting for someone patient enough to listen. Gabriel's hand began to shake. He turned page after page, and every page was filled with notes, astonishingly precise. The time Ethan maintained eye contact, the sounds Lucas made and how often he made them, both boys' reactions to different kinds of music, different kinds of touch, different voices. This wasn't the diary of a maid. This was the record of someone who truly cared, who truly loved, who truly believed these children could improve when the whole world had given up on them. Gabriel closed the notebook and placed it back exactly where it had been on the chair. He stood in the middle of the room between the two cribs and watched his son sleep. They aren't broken. The words kept echoing in his head. They're waiting for someone patient enough to listen. And that someone wasn't him. That someone was a maid he had once wanted to fire. Gabriel left the nursery with heavy steps, but something inside him had shifted. A small crack in the wall he'd built around his heart, a place where light was beginning to seep in. A week had passed since the night Gabriel read Scarlett's notebook, a week in which he couldn't stop thinking about the lines she had written, about the way she counted every breath his sons took, about the conclusion that had shattered and reshaped the way he saw everything. They aren't broken. They're waiting for someone patient enough to listen. On the 7th night, the storm arrived without a single warning. New York's sky shifted from dull gray to pitch black in less than an hour, and then the rain came down like a waterfall. Thunder rolled without pause, each blast like a bomb detonating right on the roof of Stone Manor. Lightning tore open the darkness, flooding the entire estate with light for a heartbeat, then dropping it back into night. The power faltered, the lights flickered like they were gasping for life, and then went out completely. The backup generator roared to life, but it took a few seconds to steady, and in those few seconds, Stone Manor fell into absolute black. Gabriel was sitting in his office when the intercom phone rang. Derek's voice, the night nurse on duty, came through the receiver with undisguised panic. "Mr. Stone, I need help right now. The boys, they're crying and I can't. They won't stop. The thunder is scaring them and I don't know what to do." Gabriel didn't need to hear anything else. He dropped the phone and bolted out of his office, running down the corridor toward the east wing. Through the handheld monitor he always kept in his pocket, Ethan and Lucas's crying spilled out, weak but frantic, ripping at him with every step he took. Another thunderclap exploded overhead, shaking the entire house. The cries through the monitor doubled. He ran faster. But when Gabriel reached the nursery door, he stopped as if he'd been nailed to the floor. Scarlett was already there. She sat on the floor between the two cribs, and in her arms were both of his sons. She had lifted them out and pulled them close, one on each side, their heads resting against her chest. She was singing. Her voice trembled, and it was obvious she was afraid too, but the melody stayed steady, stayed gentle. The same wordless song he had heard the night before. Derek stood nearby, helpless, his arms hanging at his sides. He saw Gabriel and started to speak, but Gabriel lifted a hand, signaling him to be quiet. Thunder roared again, a deafening blast directly above. The whole room shuddered, but this time, Ethan and Lucas didn't scream the way they had before. In Scarlett's arms, they only burrowed deeper against her, tiny fingers clutching the fabric of her shirt. She held them tighter and sang a little louder, just enough to drown out the rain howling at the windows. Lucas stopped crying first. The sobs thinned, grew farther apart, then faded into silence, leaving only a small, broken sniffle. Then Ethan, the little boy, stopped crying, his breathing slowly settling, and in the hush between two thunderclaps, the impossible happened. Ethan lifted his head, eyes still swollen and red from tears, and looked at Scarlett's face. Then he reached up, his tiny hand trembling, and touched her cheek, not the mindless brush of a baby waving through empty air. This was deliberate, clear, unmistakable. Ethan was touching Scarlett's face, and he was looking at her, truly looking at her, with eyes full of trust. Gabriel forgot how to breathe. So did Scarlett. She went still for a beat, then her eyes filled with tears. She turned to Ethan, one arm supporting Lucas, the other hand rising to cradle the small hand resting on her cheek. "Shh. Mama's here," she whispered, pure instinct, without thinking. "Mama won't let anyone scare you." Then she froze a second time, realizing what she had just said, realizing Gabriel was standing there in the darkness of the doorway, watching her without blinking. The blood drained from her face. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice shaking. "I didn't mean... I shouldn't. I just... They were crying and I wasn't thinking." She didn't finish the sentence. Gabriel stepped into the room, and she flinched as if bracing for his rage, but the rage didn't come. Gabriel stopped a few steps away, looking down at Ethan, at the tiny hand still pressed to Scarlett's cheek, at Lucas already asleep in her arms, and Scarlett saw something she never would have believed. Gabriel Stone's eyes, the Silent King's eyes, the eyes of the most powerful Mafia boss on the East Coast, the man people said didn't have a heart. Those eyes were wet, not tears falling, just wet, glistening in the dim glow of the nightlight, as if something deep inside him had cracked and was seeping through the fracture. He didn't say a word, not one. He only stood there in silence, for the first time in 2 years letting someone see him not as a king, not as a killer, but as a shattered father watching his child touch a woman they called Mama, a woman who wasn't their biological mother, yet had given them what he could not. 2 weeks had passed since the night of the storm. 2 weeks in which Gabriel couldn't forget the image of Ethan reaching up to touch Scarlett's cheek, couldn't forget the dampness in his own eyes, as he stood in the doorway watching a maid hold his sons against her heart. 2 weeks in which he began to linger longer whenever he passed the nursery, began to listen to her lullaby drifting through a door left slightly ajar, but he still hadn't stepped inside. He still didn't dare. Sunday came, Mother's Day, and Gabriel had forgotten the day even existed, until Helena Stone's gleaming black Bentley rolled to a stop at the gates of Stone Manor at 10 o'clock in the morning. His mother stepped out, silver hair swept up into a flawless chignon, a pearl-colored Chanel dress, fitted to a figure that remained slender though she was nearly 60. Behind her came a young woman, around 30, hair a bright, polished blonde, a vivid red dress, a face beautiful and cold as if carved from ice. Victoria Ashford, the daughter of Don Ashford, the boss who controlled the Midwest, a long-standing ally of the Stone family. Gabriel knew at once this wasn't a social visit. Brunch was set in the grand dining room, a table long enough for 20, yet only 3 seats were filled. Helena sat across from Gabriel, Victoria beside her, and the air was heavy the way it gets before a storm breaks. Gabriel had never liked family meals. "Gabriel, you look tired," Helena began, her voice sweet while her sharp eyes swept over his face. "You need someone to take care of you. You need a woman at your side." "I lost Catherine 2 years ago," Gabriel replied evenly, turning his wineglass in his hand but not drinking. 2 years is enough," Helena cut in, dismissing him. "You can't live like a widower forever. Victoria is intelligent, beautiful, and she understands our world. She'd be a perfect wife." Victoria smiled, her full red lips curving. "I hear you have 2 little boys," she said, her tone light, as if she hardly cared. "They're in a separate wing, aren't they? Wonderful, then they won't interfere with daily life." Gabriel's grip tightened on the glass until his knuckles went white. He didn't look at Victoria. He looked at his mother with a gaze that would have made anyone else back away. But Helena Stone wasn't anyone else. She had given birth to the Silent King. She wasn't afraid of him. I've looked into a specialized facility in Connecticut, Helena continued, as if she couldn't see the anger boiling in her son's eyes. They can care for the children far better than here, and you can start over. Have healthy children, real heirs to the Stone Empire. Real heirs, Gabriel repeated, his voice so low it was almost a growl. Are you saying my sons aren't real heirs? They're disabled, Gabriel, Helena said bluntly, offering not an ounce of mercy. They can't walk, they can't talk, they can't do anything. You need to face reality. The Stone family needs. Gabriel shoved back his chair, oak scraping with a harsh squeal across marble. He was about to speak, to say something, to shout that she understood nothing, but at that exact moment a sound rose from the small earpiece he always wore. The nursery monitor. Ma. Gabriel went still. That sound. Again. Without another word, he turned and strode out of the dining room, leaving Helena and Victoria behind with questions hanging in the air. He heard their heels following, but he didn't care. He moved fast down the corridor, turned into the east wing, and stopped at the nursery door. What he saw made him forget how to breathe. Ethan and Lucas weren't in their cribs. They were on the floor, and they were crawling. 2 children the doctors had sworn would never move, using tiny hands and trembling knees to inch forward. Toward Scarlet, she knelt in the middle of the room, arms open wide, eyes wet while her mouth blazed with a radiant smile, urging them on in a voice soft as breath. Good boy, come to Mama. You can do it. Lucas reached her first. He crawled slowly, wobbling, nearly toppling more than once, but he didn't quit. Then he touched Scarlet's leg, lifted his face to hers, and made the sound. Ma. Ethan came behind him, slower but no less determined. He reached her, fingers clutching the hem of Scarlet's skirt, his face flushed with effort, and he whispered, Mama. Gabriel stood in the doorway, unable to move, unable to breathe. 2 years. 2 years of doctors telling him his sons would never move, would never speak. And now, right in front of him, they were crawling, calling a woman Mama. A sharp breath sounded behind him. Helena and Victoria had arrived, standing at Gabriel's back, seeing it all. Gabriel, she's only a maid, Helena said, her voice edged with steel, yet something beneath it trembled, as if she couldn't believe her own eyes. You can't allow a maid. Gabriel turned. His gaze was ice, his voice so low it was almost the growl of an animal. Get out of my house. Both of you. Helena stepped back, and for the first time in her life she was truly afraid of her son. Victoria was too, the cold perfection of her face turning pale. Gabriel said nothing else. He simply stood there, a barrier between them and the nursery, until Helena grabbed Victoria's hand, turned, and walked away to the quick, retreating click of heels on stone. When the sound faded into nothing, Gabriel finally turned back. Scarlet was holding both children in her arms, her eyes on him, worried and frightened, uncertain what he would do. But he didn't speak to her. He stepped into the room, knelt beside her, and for the first time in 2 years he was this close to his sons. Ethan turned his head to look at him. Blue eyes, exactly like Catherine's, clear and curious. Then the little boy reached out and touched the back of Gabriel's hand. For the first time, Gabriel stopped breathing. That small hand, warm and soft, rested on his, the hand that had killed, the hand that had crushed enemies without trembling. And now it trembled with emotion, with joy, with something he thought he'd lost forever. Hey son, Gabriel whispered, his voice splintering like glass. Dad's here. I'm sorry it took me so long, but I'm here now, 2 days after what happened in the nursery. After he'd thrown Helena and Victoria out of the house, after the moment Ethan touched his hand for the first time, Gabriel sat in his office with a mood that didn't feel like him at all. Something had shifted inside him, a crack in the wall of ice, and he didn't want to seal it shut anymore. A knock sounded at the door, and then Marcus came in. Gabriel's right-hand man, a 45-year-old with salt and pepper hair and eyes sharp as a blade, set a thick file on the desk. Boss, she isn't simple, Marcus said, his voice low and steady the way it always was when he reported on a target that needed to be dealt with. Gabriel pulled the file toward him and turned to the first page. Scarlet Hayes, born in 1998, orphaned young, raised at the Street Mary Orphanage in Boston. No family, no relatives, no one in this world who belonged to her. He flipped to the next page. In 2020, married Ryan Hayes. Gabriel looked at the man's photo in the file, a handsome face with something sly in the eyes. Ryan Hayes, 28 years old, gambling addiction, prior record for assault. Gabriel kept reading and felt anger begin to boil in his veins. In 2022, Scarlett was admitted to the emergency room. 3 broken ribs, a mild brain hematoma, and a miscarriage in the 7th month. Gabriel stopped on that line, reading it again and again as if he couldn't trust his own eyes. A miscarriage in the 7th month, week 28, the same week Ethan and Lucas were born, the same week Catherine died to save their children. But Scarlett had no one to save her. She lost her baby alone in a hospital, with broken ribs and blood pooling in her head because her husband had beaten her that badly. He turned the page. Ryan Hayes owed the Castellano family $200,000. In 2023, he died in a car accident. Marcus spoke, his tone dry. It wasn't an accident, boss. Castellano took him out because he couldn't pay. They made it look like an accident. Gabriel nodded. He knew Castellano. He knew how they worked. But that wasn't what mattered most to him right now. That same year, 2023, Scarlett Hayes was hospitalized a second time. A suicide attempt. Slashed wrists. Saved in time. Gabriel's hand tightened on the paper until it crumpled beneath his fingers. She'd tried to die. After losing her child. After losing her husband, even if he'd been garbage. She hadn't wanted to live anymore. The faint scar on her wrist he'd glimpsed the other day. He understood now where it came from. The last page. Current status. Medical debt of $80,000. Working 3 jobs at once. One at a laundromat, one at a cafe, and one at Stone Manor. Living in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. No heat in winter. Attached to the file was a photograph. Gabriel lifted it, and it felt like his heart was being crushed. Scarlett lay in a hospital bed, her face bruised, her lips swollen, one eye unable to open from the swelling, a breathing tube in her nose, a monitor blinking beside her. This was the photo from her medical record the year she lost her baby. The girl in the picture looked like she was already dead, even though her heart was still beating. Gabriel stared at it for a long time, his fingers drifting without thinking across that bruised face. She lost her baby at week 28, he murmured, not really speaking to Marcus, just like Ethan and Lucas. But her baby didn't survive. Marcus stood still and said nothing. He'd been with Gabriel long enough to know when silence was the only thing to offer. "Boss, do you want me to fire her?" Marcus asked after a while. Her past is complicated, and it's tied to Castellano, even if only indirectly. It could be a risk. Gabriel set the photograph down and looked up at Marcus. His eyes weren't ice anymore. There was something else in them, something Marcus almost never saw in his boss. "No," Gabriel said, his voice low but absolute. "Triple her salary. Take care of the $80,000 debt. I want it gone as if it never existed. And Marcus, don't let her know. Anything." Marcus lifted an eyebrow but didn't ask. He nodded, gathered the file, and left the room. Gabriel sat alone in his office, looking out the window where late afternoon sunlight was turning the garden gold. She'd lost everything, and somehow, she still had enough love left to give to children who weren't hers. He didn't know if he deserved that, but he knew he'd protect her, at any cost. That night, after Ethan and Lucas had fallen into a deep sleep in their cribs, after Scarlett sang the familiar wordless lullaby and turned off the nursery light, Gabriel waited for her in the sitting room. He didn't know why he was here instead of in his office the way he was every night. He only knew that after reading Marcus's file, after seeing the photograph of her in a hospital bed with a bruised face and empty eyes, he couldn't stop himself from finding her. On the coffee table in front of him sat 2 glasses of whiskey, amber and glinting under the low light. Scarlett came in and stopped when she saw him. "Mr. Stone," she said, surprised. "I didn't know you were still awake." Gabriel gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit." She hesitated for a second, then walked over and sat on the edge of the cushion, as if ready to stand at any moment. He slid the whiskey toward her. She looked at it but didn't drink. Silence stretched out, the tick of a clock somewhere in the room, the faint wind outside the windows, the sound of their breathing, lonely in a space that was too large. Then Gabriel spoke. "You had a child. Not a question. A statement." Scarlett went still. Her entire body stiffened as if someone had dumped ice water over her. Her brown eyes dropped to her hands, where the faint scar on her wrist showed beneath her sleeve. Gabriel watched her tug the fabric lower, hiding the mark of her past. "You know," she whispered. "Not a question." He nodded without explaining how he knew. It didn't matter. She looked up, her eyes shining, but not a single tear fell. She had cried enough. Perhaps she had run dry a long time ago. "Lily," she said, her voice light as breath. "A daughter. I was going to name her Lily, because lilies are my favorite flowers." She came at week 28, and she didn't stay. Week 28, Gabriel repeated, his voice rough. The same week as Ethan and Lucas. Scarlett nodded, her gaze fixed on nothing. Yes, the same week. But your children survived. Mine didn't. She paused and swallowed hard. And she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Gabriel had seen the scar. He had read the file. He knew what she had tried to do after she lost everything. A heavy silence settled over the room. Then Gabriel did something he hadn't done with anyone since Catherine died. He opened himself. I've been avoiding my children for 2 years, he said, his voice low, splintering at the edges of each word. 2 years, Scarlett. I've been in this house every day, only a few steps from their room, and I never went in. Because every time I look at them, I see Catherine. I see her face when she said, "Save the children, save the children." I see what it cost her, and I see my own failure. He stopped and drew a slow breath. I look at my sons and I see death, so I stayed away. Because it was the only way I knew how to survive. Scarlett looked at him, and something shifted in her brown eyes. It was no longer the look of a maid facing her employer. It was one broken soul looking at another. You didn't fail, she said softly. You're still here. You're still alive. Your children are still alive. That isn't failure. Gabriel gave a quiet laugh, a sound with no joy in it. I'm in this house. But I'm not with them. There's a difference, Scarlett. There's a very big difference between existing and truly living. And for the last 2 years, I've only been existing. Silence again. Then Scarlett did something that made Gabriel forget how to breathe. She reached out and laid her hand lightly on the back of his. The first touch between them, not accidental, not a brush of chance. A deliberate gesture, gentle yet heavy with understanding. Her hand was small and warm on his, a hand marked by a scar, a hand that had once wanted to end everything, now offering comfort instead. It's never too late to start again, she said, her voice as soft as drifting wind. For both of us. Gabriel looked at her hand on his, then lifted his eyes to her face. In the dim light, she wasn't a maid anymore. She was a woman who had walked through hell and still had enough love left to give. And he, for the first time in 2 years, felt something beyond pain and guilt. He felt hope. A week had passed since that confession in the sitting room. Since the moment Scarlett placed her hand on Gabriel's and told him it was never too late to begin again. A week in which everything inside Stone Manor seemed to be changing, gently but surely, like ice melting into spring. Gabriel started showing up in the nursery every night, sitting in the corner while Scarlett sang the children to sleep. And sometimes Ethan would turn his head and look at him with those clear blue eyes, but peace never lasted in Gabriel Stone's world. On Monday morning, a box appeared at the gates of Stone Manor. There was no delivery person. No camera footage of anyone placing it there, only a black box, tied with a red ribbon the color of blood, sitting motionless on the marble steps. A guard carried it inside and set it on Gabriel's desk after checking it for explosives. Gabriel opened it. Inside, resting on white silk, were 2 dolls, one boy, one girl, with blonde hair and blue glass eyes. They would have been beautiful if not for one detail. Their throats had been cut. The cuts were sharp and clean, as if someone had been careful, meticulous, almost reverent in doing it. And at the bottom of the box was a small card, the elegant handwriting neat and precise. So beautiful. It would be a shame if something happened. Gabriel didn't move. His face stayed stone cold, not a muscle shifting, but his eyes darkened, becoming 2 deep black pits filled with a rage that would make anyone shudder. He knew who had sent this. Castellano. They knew about his children, and they likely knew about Scarlett and her indirect connection to their family through Ryan Hayes. And now they were sending a message. Gabriel lifted the phone. Marcus. Triple security. I want 24/7 coverage on every corner of the estate. Scarlett and the boys don't leave this house. Not one step. Do you understand? He hung up without waiting for an answer. Then he picked up the card, looked at it one last time, and set it on fire. But he kept the 2 dolls and placed them in the desk drawer as a reminder of what he'd do to anyone who dared touch his family. 3 days later, 3 in the morning, Gabriel was in his office reviewing security reports when gunfire ripped through the night. 1 shot, 2 shots, then a rapid burst like fireworks from the direction of the gates. He sprang up, drew the gun hidden beneath the desk, and ran into the hall. Marcus was already there, face tight, weapon in hand. Castellano, boss, 6 men, heavy weapons. They took out 2 guards at the gate. Gabriel didn't waste time. Get Scarlett and the boys to the safe room. Now, I'll handle this. Marcus nodded and sprinted toward the east wing. Gabriel ran the other way, toward the gunfire. He wasn't afraid. Fear was a luxury he'd given up long ago. The only thing he felt was a cold, ruthless fury, ready to grind down anyone who dared threaten what was his. In the nursery, Scarlett had jolted awake at the sound of the shots. She held Ethan and Lucas tight against her, both boys crying in terror. Marcus burst in, voice urgent. "Follow me. Now." She didn't ask what was happening. She only clutched both children and ran after Marcus, down the stairs, through an underground corridor, to a steel door she had never known existed. The safe room, steel walls 30 centimeters thick, a keypad-locked door, enough water and food inside for 2 weeks. Marcus shoved her in and punched the code from the outside. "Stay here until someone comes to open it. Don't come out for any reason." Then he was gone, racing back to fight beside Gabriel. Scarlett sat on the cold concrete floor, both children trembling in her arms. Darkness pressed in around them, with only a weak emergency light glowing in the corner. The gunfire echoed from far away, booming like thunder, and every blast made Ethan and Lucas cry harder. "Shh, Mama's here," Scarlett whispered, her voice shaking as she forced it steady. "Mama won't let anyone hurt you. Mama's here. Mama's here." She sang the familiar wordless song, her voice slipping through tears but never stopping. Outside the safe room, Gabriel was in the middle of hell. 6 Castellano gunmen had breached the gardens, submachine guns in their hands, spraying bullets at anything that moved. 3 of Gabriel's guards were down, but he was still standing. Gabriel dropped one man, then a second. Marcus took out another from behind. But Gabriel's magazine ran dry, and the 4th attacker lunged at him with a dagger. Gabriel dodged the slash, caught the man's wrist with his bare hand, and snapped it with a dry crack. The 5th charged, and Gabriel met him with a crushing punch to the throat. The fight was short, brutal. When it ended, 4 Castellano men lay motionless on the blood-soaked grass, and the last 2 were bound, forced to their knees in front of Gabriel, eyes wide with fear. Gabriel didn't look at them. Blood streaked his face. He didn't know whose. Maybe the enemy's. Maybe his own. He turned and ran through the manor, down to the basement, stopping at the safe room's steel door. "Open it!" he roared, his voice raw from shouting orders through the whole fight. "Open the door. Scarlett. It's safe now." Inside, Scarlett heard his voice. She stood on trembling legs and entered the code Marcus had given her before locking the door. The steel door opened with a heavy hiss. Gabriel stood there, blood on his face, clothes disheveled, breath coming hard. But he was standing. He was alive. Scarlett looked up, eyes red, both children still in her arms, their faces buried against her chest. Their crying stopped at some point without her noticing. Gabriel looked at her, looked at his sons, and something inside his chest he'd thought had died long ago suddenly slammed hard enough to hurt. They were safe. His family was safe, and he would burn the whole world before he let anyone touch them again. Gabriel stepped into the safe room, and the outside world, the gunfire, the blood, the bodies on the lawn, seemed to vanish completely. All that remained was this cold, concrete space, the weak emergency light, and 3 people looking at him with emotions he couldn't name. Scarlett was still sitting on the floor, holding Ethan and Lucas as if she would never let go. The boys had stopped crying, but their small bodies were still trembling, their faces buried against her chest as if searching for the last safe place left in this world. Gabriel dropped to his knees in front of them, his knees meeting the freezing concrete, and he did something he hadn't done in 2 years. He held them, all 3 of them. His arms went around Scarlett's shoulders, around his sons' tiny bodies, pulling them into him. Blood was on his hands, blood was on his face, but he didn't care. He only wanted to feel them, to know they were truly safe, to keep them so close nothing could ever take them away. For the first time in 2 years, Gabriel Stone held his children, and that feeling, the warmth of those little bodies in his arms, the scent of baby wash and lavender in Scarlett's hair, the softened rhythm of the children's breathing, it broke something deep inside him that he'd thought had turned to stone long ago. "I'm sorry," Gabriel whispered into Scarlett's auburn brown hair, his voice rough and shaking. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this. This is my world, violence and blood and death, and you shouldn't have to endure it." Scarlett lifted her head and looked at him, brown eyes still red, but with no blame in them. "I'm here because I want to be here," she said, gentle but certain. "Not because of a contract, not because of money, because I chose to be here. With them, with you, and no gunman can change that." Gabriel looked at her, and in that moment he understood she wasn't only a maid, not only the one caring for his sons, she was something more, something he didn't dare name but could feel in every beat of his heart. Then, In the silence of the safe room, inside the warmth of intertwined arms, a small sound rose. Lucas stopped pressing his face into Scarlett's chest. He lifted his head, blue eyes wide as gemstones, staring straight at Gabriel. And his lips moved. Da. Gabriel went still, his entire body locked as if struck by lightning. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at his little boy in stunned disbelief. "What did you just say?" he whispered, his voice shaking so hard it was almost soundless. Lucas looked at him, clear-eyed and unafraid, and repeated it. Da. Dad. For the first time in his life, his son called him Dad. Ethan, as if unwilling to be left behind, lifted his head too. He looked at Gabriel, his lips moving with more effort, slower, but at last the sound came. Da. Gabriel pulled both boys tight against him, and his shoulders began to shake. Not from cold, not from exhaustion after the fight, but from something rising up out of him, something he'd held down for 2 years, something he'd believed had died with Catherine. The Silent King, the most powerful Mafia boss on the East Coast, the man who hadn't shed a single tear at his wife's funeral, was crying like a child in a concrete safe room, holding the sons he'd abandoned for 2 years, the sons who had just called him Dad for the first time. Scarlett watched them, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She reached out and wrapped her arms around all 3 of them, forming a circle of broken souls finding their way back to one another. And in that cold, safe room, in the black night after a blood-soaked battle, a family was being born. Not by blood, not by legal papers, but by presence, by love, by the first word Dad from children the world had given up on. 2 days had passed since the fateful night in the safe room, since the moment Lucas and Ethan called Gabriel Dad for the first time. 2 days in which Gabriel wasn't at Stone Manor, because he had work to do. The kind of work the Silent King did best. No one knew exactly what happened to the Castellano family in those 48 hours. There were no articles, no news reports, only a terrifying silence spreading through the underworld like an invisible tsunami. When Gabriel stepped out of the gleaming black car on the afternoon of the second day, Marcus walked at his side, the salt and pepper-haired man's face giving nothing away, yet a quiet satisfaction lived in his eyes. "It's done, boss," Marcus said as they climbed the steps of Stone Manor. "Castellano isn't a problem anymore. From now on, no one will dare touch Stone Manor or anyone inside it." Gabriel nodded and said nothing. He didn't need the details, and Marcus didn't need to explain. That was how they'd worked for 15 years. But when the front door opened, Gabriel stopped. In the sitting room, seated on the red velvet sofa, was Helena Stone. His mother looked nothing like she had the last time they'd seen each other, when she'd been thrown out along with Victoria Ashford. Her silver hair was no longer swept into a flawless chignon, but fell to her shoulders, her face bare of makeup, dark shadows under her eyes as if she hadn't slept for many nights. Gabriel signaled Marcus to step back, then walked into the sitting room and stood across from his mother without sitting down. Helena lifted her head to look at him, and for the first time in his life, Gabriel saw his mother looking older, fragile, no longer the steel woman who had given birth to and raised the most powerful Mafia boss on the East Coast. "Gabriel, I heard about the attack," Helena said, her voice trembling slightly. "I heard the Castellano men broke in here, that they almost—" She didn't finish, as if she didn't dare think about what could have happened. Gabriel studied her, his eyes cold and searching. "Are you worried about your grandchildren? Or the Stone legacy?" Helena flinched as if struck. She looked at her son, and something in her gaze broke. Silence stretched. 1 minute, 2 minutes, the tick of a clock somewhere in the room that felt too large and too empty. Then Helena did something Gabriel had never seen in all his 36 years as her son. She cried. Not restrained tears, not the polished kind she'd used in public to make an impression. This was real. Her shoulders shook. Tears ran freely down the lines of her face, and she didn't try to hide it. "I was wrong," she said through sobs, her voice splintering like glass. "I was wrong about everything. About the children, I said they weren't real heirs. I wanted to send them away. I didn't look at them as my grandchildren. And about her, the maid, I judged her wrong. She stayed to protect my grandchildren when the Castellano men attacked. While Helena stopped, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, a gesture so ordinary Gabriel had never seen from this woman who was always perfect. Gabriel stood there in silence. He didn't rush forward to comfort her the way an ordinary son would. He didn't hurry to forgive. What Helena had said and done couldn't be erased by tears. But he didn't turn away, either. "The children are still here," Gabriel said after a long while. His voice wasn't as cold as before, but it wasn't warm. "Scarlett is too. That's my family now, Mother. And I'll protect them at any cost, even against you if I have to. Helena nodded, accepting it. I understand, she said, steadier now, though her voice remained rough. I won't interfere anymore. I'm only asking one thing. Gabriel raised an eyebrow and waited. Let me see them, Helena said. Only see them. I want to look at my grandchildren, this time with different eyes. Gabriel hesitated for a second, then nodded. They walked down the long hallway toward the east wing, stopping at the nursery door. It was slightly open, and inside Scarlett sat beside the two cribs, reading in a gentle voice. Ethan and Lucas were asleep, their faces peaceful under the soft light. Helena stood in the doorway and didn't step in. She only stood there and looked at the two small grandchildren, and for the first time, she didn't look at them as disabled children, as a problem to solve, as a stain on the stone name. She looked at them as children. Only children, with round cheeks, with tiny hands, with steady breathing and sleep. Her grandchildren, her blood, and she had almost lost them without ever truly knowing them. A month had passed since the night of the attack, since Castellano had been erased from the map of the underworld, since Helena Stone stood at the nursery door and, for the first time, looked at her grandchildren as real children. Stone Manor had changed. It wasn't a cold, silent fortress like a tomb anymore. There was laughter now, small and broken, but real. There was babbling, not yet full sentences, but unmistakably alive. There was life, for the first time in 2 years. Ethan and Lucas had made astonishing progress, as if the attack that night had been a turning point not only for Gabriel, but for the boys as well. They could sit up now without support, backs straight and steady. They crawled better, faster, chasing Scarlett around the room with hiccuping giggles. And they spoke. Not only Mama and Dada, but other words too. Slow and difficult, yet clear. Dr. Price, the top pediatric neurologist Gabriel had hired, called it a miracle. He had no scientific explanation for the speed of their improvement. Gabriel knew the answer. The answer had auburn brown hair and warm brown eyes, and the answer sat on the nursery floor every day, patient and unconditional. But that same answer was holding a letter she hadn't told anyone about. The letter was from the Eastwood Child Therapy and Development Center, one of the most prestigious facilities in the country. They had followed Ethan and Lucas's progress through Dr. Price's reports, and they wanted Scarlett, a position as a child development specialist, a salary 5 times what she made now, housing provided, wide open opportunities for advancement, a future, a way out of the past, out of the small room in someone else's estate, out of the role of a maid that no longer felt like it fit her. Scarlett folded the letter, slipped it into her pocket, and said nothing to anyone, but the children knew. Somehow, they sensed something in her had shifted. Ethan began to cling more, crying whenever she left the room for even a minute. Lucas stopped practicing words and only sat watching her with sad blue eyes, as if asking a question he didn't have language for. Gabriel noticed. He always noticed everything. That was how he had survived in the underworld for 2 decades. He saw the way Scarlett stared out the window with a faraway look. He saw the way she held the boys tighter each night as if saying goodbye. You got an offer, didn't you? Gabriel asked one afternoon while Scarlett was feeding the boys in the smaller dining room. Scarlett's hand stilled, and she didn't look at him. I know everything that happens in this house. Scarlett exhaled and set the spoon down. I haven't decided. That night, Gabriel passed Scarlett's room and saw the light was still on. He stopped at the door, and what he saw made his heart tighten. Scarlett was packing. Her few clothes were folded neatly into an old suitcase. The navy cloth notebook lay on the bed, waiting to be put in. Gabriel pushed the door open and stepped inside without knocking. You're really leaving? Scarlett turned, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. She didn't speak. She only stood there, still holding a shirt she hadn't folded yet. Why? Gabriel asked, and his voice wasn't angry the way she expected, only tired, and something else, something that sounded like pain. I don't belong here, Scarlett finally said, her voice shaking. Don't you understand? The attack, Castellano, it was all because of me. My husband owed them money. They killed him, and somehow they found out I was here. I bring bad luck to this house, to you, to the boys. If I stay, someone else will come. There will be another danger. Gabriel stepped closer until she had to lift her chin to look at him. He took her hand, his large, rough palm closing around her small, scarred one. You don't bring bad luck, he said, his voice low and certain. You bring hope. You're the only reason my sons are alive, the reason they speak, the reason they laugh, the reason they're real children instead of patients with no future. You think I'm going to let you go after everything you've done? Scarlett cried, tears running freely down her cheeks. "I'm scared, Gabriel." For the first time, she said his name, without sir, without any formality. "I've lost too much. My baby. My husband. Even if he was disgusting, he was still someone I once loved. I almost lost my own life. And now I'm afraid. Afraid that if I stay, I'll love the boys too much, love you too much, and then I'll lose everything again. I can't take that. I won't survive it a second time." Gabriel didn't speak. He only pulled her into him and held her tight, his chin resting on the crown of her head. "You won't lose anyone again," he whispered into her auburn brown hair that smelled of lavender. "I swear it, Scarlett. On my life, on everything I have, you won't lose anyone again, and I'm not letting go of you." The next morning, when the first sunlight slipped through the nursery curtains, Scarlett woke in the armchair by the window. She had slept there all night, after Gabriel held her and said he wasn't letting go. She hadn't gone back to her room, hadn't kept packing. She had only sat here, watching Ethan and Lucas sleep, asking herself what she truly wanted. A soft knock made her turn her head. Gabriel stood in the doorway, wearing a white shirt with the collar buttons undone, black hair slightly mussed as if he had just woken. In his hand was a brown leather folder. He walked into the room, past her, and set the folder on the changing table by the window. Scarlett watched, confused. Gabriel turned to face her, his expression gentler than she had ever seen, the cold mask of the silent king gone, leaving only a man trying to do the right thing. "Read it," he said softly. "Then decide." Scarlett stood and stepped to the table, opening the folder. Legal language swam before her eyes, but she understood the meaning. Guardianship, partial, shared. Her name, Scarlett Hayes, listed alongside Gabriel Stone as the legal guardian of Ethan Gabriel Stone and Lucas James Stone. In this document, she wasn't a maid anymore. She was a guardian, with the right to make decisions about the boys' health, education, and welfare equal to their biological father. Scarlett turned to the last page, and her breath caught when she saw the handwritten note at the bottom, Gabriel's sharp, powerful script. "Your family. That doesn't change whether you sign or not, but I want you to stay because you want to. Not because of duty, not because of guilt, because you choose us, the way we've chosen you." Scarlett read the lines again and again, her fingers drifting without thought over the dried ink. She didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do. This was everything she had ever dreamed of. A family, a place to belong, and it was also everything she feared, because she had lost too much, and she wasn't sure she still had the courage to trust happiness again. "No strings, no trap," Gabriel said when her silence stretched too long. "If one day you want to leave, you can still leave. I only want you to know that legally, and in my heart, you're part of this family. That place is yours, if you want it." Scarlett set the folder down, not signing, not refusing. She turned and walked to the two cribs. Ethan and Lucas were awake now, their clear blue eyes watching her, following every movement the way they always had for months. She knelt between the cribs, hands gripping the wooden rails, and looked at the children she loved as if they were her own. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, not really speaking to anyone. Maybe to herself, maybe to unseen spirits watching over her, to Lily, the little girl she had never been allowed to hold. "I want to stay with you, but I'm scared. Scared I'll ruin everything. Scared I don't deserve this. Scared fate will steal it all again the way it always has. Do you want me to stay?" Lucas looked at her, blue eyes like the sea, and reached through the crib slats. His tiny hand touched her cheek, warm and gentle, a gesture he had learned from the storm night, from the times she held him and promised Mama was here. Then his lips moved, and the sound that came out wasn't the word Scarlett expected. "Not Mama?" "Scar," Lucas said, slowly, with effort, but so clear in every syllable it felt like the room stopped. "Scar, let." Scarlett froze. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at him in stunned disbelief. Lucas didn't call her Mama. Lucas called her by her name. Her name. He knew who she was. Not a blurred idea of a mother, but a specific person, Scarlett, the one who had been with him every day, who had sung him to sleep every night, who had loved him without condition. Ethan, as if unwilling to let his brother be alone, reached through the slats in his own crib. He touched Scarlett's hand, curled his fingers around hers, and made the sound, "Scar, let." The two syllables rang through the nursery flooded with morning light. Not Mama, Scarlett. They knew who she was. They didn't call her by a general title anyone could wear. They called her by her name, the name she had carried for 27 years, a name that now sounded like the most beautiful music she had ever heard. They chose her, not because she was the only caregiver, not from blind instinct, but because they knew her, understood her, and wanted her with them. Scarlett cried. The tears poured out, unstoppable, as she reached into both cribs and pulled Ethan and Lucas into her arms, holding them tight while her shoulders shook with sobs. She cried from happiness, from the sheer weight of it, because for the first time in many years she felt she belonged somewhere, to someone. Gabriel stood at the doorway in silence, and his eyes were wet. He didn't step in, not wanting to break the moment. He only stood there watching the woman he had hired as a maid, now holding his sons and crying, and he understood this was the answer. This was what he had been waiting for. Scarlett lifted her head and looked at him through tears, and she smiled, the brightest smile he had ever seen on her face. "They asked," she said, her voice choked but full of joy. "They said my name. They chose me." That was all she needed. She didn't need promises. She didn't need guarantees about the future. She only needed to know these children wanted her, and now she did. She placed Ethan and Lucas back into their cribs, stood, and walked to the changing table. She picked up the pen, and with a hand that no longer trembled, she signed her name on the final line of the guardianship papers. Scarlett Hayes. From today on, she wasn't the maid of Stone Manor anymore. She was family. 2 weeks after Scarlett signed the guardianship papers, Ethan and Lucas's 3rd birthday arrived. Gabriel didn't throw a grand party the way other wealthy families often did. No hundreds of guests, no reporters, no show. Just the backyard of Stone Manor on a mild, sunny afternoon, with blue and white balloons tied to the wooden fence, with a long table covered in a tablecloth printed with little bears, and with the people who truly mattered. Gabriel stood beside the table in a pale blue shirt instead of his usual black suit, looking younger and less frightening. Scarlett sat on a picnic blanket spread over the grass with Ethan and Lucas in her lap, the 3 of them laughing at something Marcus had just said. Marcus stood nearby, for the first time not dressed in black, a beige polo shirt making him look like an ordinary uncle instead of the right-hand man of a Mafia boss. Nurse Rachel brought out tiny birthday hats, trying to perch them on the boys' heads while they kept yanking them off, startled by the strange feeling. Dr. Price stood a little farther back, a glass of orange juice in his hand, smiling at his 2 small patients with undisguised pride. And Helena Stone came too. She stood at the edge of the yard, holding 2 gift boxes wrapped in silver paper, not stepping any closer as if afraid she wouldn't be welcome. But she had come, and that was what mattered. Gabriel saw her, gave a small nod, and Helena returned a smile, small but sincere. The birthday cake was brought out, a single tier, smooth white frosting, with 3 small candles flickering on top. No names, no elaborate decorations, just simple and perfect. Ethan and Lucas wore matching blue shirts, eyes wide as they watched the dancing flames with endless curiosity. Scarlett helped them blow out the candles, and when the flames died, applause broke out, along with the boys' laughter. Then came the cake, and everything turned into a sweet kind of chaos. Ethan plunged his whole hand into the frosting and smeared it across Lucas's face. Lucas answered by throwing a piece of cake onto Ethan's shirt. They both laughed until they squealed, bright laughter spilling through the garden, and Scarlett laughed too, trying to wipe their faces while ending up covered in frosting herself. A kitchen assistant, new to the staff, walked up to Scarlett with a plate of cake. "You're the boy's nanny, right?" she asked with innocent curiosity. Before Scarlett could answer, Gabriel was beside her. He set a hand on Scarlett's back, a gesture natural and protective, then looked at the assistant with an expression that wasn't threatening, yet left no room for argument. "She's family," he said calmly, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. The assistant nodded quickly and retreated. From a distance, Helena saw it all and nodded slowly, a wordless sign of acceptance. The afternoon drifted on in sunlight and laughter, and when the sun began to drop low, the guests left one by one. Helena was the last to go, after placing the 2 gift boxes on the table and hugging her grandchildren for the first time in her life. An awkward, brief embrace, but a giant step all the same. Night fell, and Stone Manor settled into a pleasant quiet. Ethan and Lucas slept deeply, exhausted after a birthday full of joy. Scarlett stood on the 2nd-floor balcony, looking out at the garden that had been filled with laughter only hours before. She heard footsteps behind her and didn't need to turn to know who it was. Gabriel stood beside her, and together they watched the full moon hanging in a star-strewn sky. "Do you remember your first day here?" Gabriel asked after a long while, his voice gentle. Scarlett smiled. "I thought this house was beautiful like a tomb," she answered honestly. "Big, magnificent, and terrifyingly cold. Gabriel let out a quiet laugh, a rare sound Scarlett had never heard before she came to Stone Manor. "You were right," he admitted. "It really was a tomb. I turned it into a place to bury every feeling I had, every hope, every possibility of happiness. But it's different now." Silence wrapped around them, but it wasn't the heavy silence of before. This was comfortable, the kind shared by two people who didn't need words to understand each other. Then Gabriel turned to her, and his hand lifted, gently touching her cheek. Scarlett held her breath but didn't pull away. "I don't know how to love anyone after Catherine," Gabriel said, his voice low and honest. "I thought that part of me died with her. Died with the night I lost her, and almost lost our sons. But you, Scarlett, you make me want to try. You make me want to believe I can still feel, that I can still love, that I can still live, instead of only exist." Scarlett looked into his gray eyes and saw the truth there, the fear, the hope, everything she was feeling too. "I'm scared too," she whispered. "I've lost too much. I've hurt too much, but I'm willing to try. With you, with the boys, I'm willing to try." Gabriel bent down and his lips met hers, gentle, careful, like two people learning how to heal, learning how to trust again, learning how to love after life had beaten them down. Their first kiss wasn't burning, wasn't wild. It was sweet and soft, carrying the taste of hope, of new beginnings, of love beginning to grow from the ashes of the past. 6 months had passed since that first kiss on the balcony beneath the moon, and Stone Manor had become a completely different home. It was no longer a cold fortress, no longer a tomb where feelings were buried. Now it was filled with laughter, with children's babbling, with the scent of life. At the far end of the garden, where Catherine once planted hydrangeas in the first spring after she came to the Stone family as a new bride, there was a new swing set now. Gabriel had it installed 2 weeks ago, specially designed with soft safety straps and rubber-wrapped handles, enough to hold children who were still fragile without causing discomfort. Ethan sat in one swing, Lucas sat in the other, and Gabriel stood behind them, pushing both swings at the same time with gentle, careful hands. He did this himself now. Not a nurse, not Scarlett, but him. The Silent King, the most powerful Mafia boss on the East Coast, was pushing his sons on a swing with hands that had killed without trembling, and he was smiling. Gabriel had changed completely over the past 6 months, a change no one who knew him before would have believed. Every morning, before he went down to his office to deal with work, he sat in the nursery for at least an hour. He changed the boys' diapers, clumsy and awkward, always using too many wipes and sometimes fastening the diaper backward. But he did it anyway, patient and unwilling to give up. He read books to them, stumbling over long, complicated words. But Ethan and Lucas didn't care. They only liked hearing their father's voice, liked being held in his arms while he turned pages filled with bright colors. He fed them, wiped their mouths, spilled porridge everywhere, yet kept offering spoon after spoon with steady persistence. And he sang lullabies. God, he sang lullabies. His voice rough and painfully off-key, but he sang anyway, the wordless melody he learned from Scarlett, and somehow the boys still fell asleep to it. Scarlett sat on the stone bench nearby, watching them with eyes full of happiness. She wore a light floral dress, auburn brown hair loose over her shoulders, and she was heartbreakingly beautiful under the golden afternoon sun. She watched Gabriel push the swings, watched Ethan and Lucas with their cheeks flushed pink and their wide, delighted grins, and she thought this must be heaven, if heaven existed in this world. Laughter rose from the 2 children on the swings, not loud and crystal clear the way other children laughed, only small, broken sounds, imperfect. But it was laughter. The laughter of children, doctors once said, would never show normal emotional responses. Now laughing, now joyful, now alive. Gabriel slowed the swings and stepped in front, lifting both boys at once. Ethan wrapped his arms around Gabriel's neck on the left, Lucas on the right, and Gabriel held them tight. 3 faces pressed together, 3 hearts beating in the same rhythm. Scarlett stood, walked to them, and slipped her arms around all 3, forming a circle of love and belonging. Gabriel looked at her, and his gaze dropped to her belly, now softly rounded beneath the thin fabric of her dress. 4 months. They hadn't told anyone, hadn't announced it, keeping the secret for themselves like a precious gift they wanted to hold close a little longer. "Are you happy?" Gabriel asked gently, his lips brushing her forehead. Scarlett lifted her face to his, brown eyes glinting in the sunset. "I didn't know what happiness was until I came here," she whispered. "I thought I knew what loss was, what suffering was, what despair was. But I never knew what real happiness was until I met the boys, until I met you." Gabriel kissed her, gentle and sweet, with Ethan and Lucas in their arms making meaningless sounds that were full of joy. "And I didn't know I was still alive until I met you," he whispered against her mouth. "I thought my heart died with Catherine, thought I was only a walking body, breathing, killing, but unable to feel. You woke me up, Scarlet. You and the boys brought me back from the dead." They stood there in the garden, drenched in sunset light, 4 people who had once been broken now holding one another, and a small life growing inside Scarlet, promising a future none of them had ever dared to dream. 1 year later, Stone Manor had become an entirely different home. The nursery was no longer hushed like a hospital room, but overflowing with color, toys, and scribbled drawings taped across the walls. Ethan and Lucas were 4 years old now, still slower than other children, still needing daily support. But they could walk with their small walker, they could speak short sentences even if the words still stumbled. They could laugh, they could love, and they could be loved. That evening, Gabriel sat in the old armchair in the nursery, reading to his sons. The book's spine was worn, its pages yellowed with time, and the margins were filled with notes in Catherine's graceful handwriting. She had written those lines while she was still pregnant, when she still dreamed of the day she would read to her children. Catherine never got that chance, but now Gabriel was doing it for her, his voice low and warm in the room, and her notes seemed to come alive again with every page he turned. Lucas had fallen asleep against Gabriel's shoulder, breathing evenly, tiny fingers gripping the collar of his father's shirt. Scarlet sat beside them, Ethan in her lap already asleep too, and one of her hands rested on her rounded belly, where the little life inside kicked softly as if trying to join the family's reading time. 8 months now. Only a few weeks left before Stone Manor welcomed a new member. Gabriel closed the book, laid Lucas into his crib, then turned to help Scarlet settle Ethan down as well. They stood there for a moment, watching the children sleep, and then Scarlet stepped in front of Catherine's portrait on the wall. The wedding photo. Catherine in her white dress, her smile radiant, her blue eyes like the sea. "I'll love your children," Scarlet whispered to the photograph. "I promise, Catherine. I'll love them as if they were my own. I'll protect them, I'll raise them, and I'll tell them about you, about the mother who gave her life so they could be born." Gabriel stood beside her, one hand resting on her back, looking up at the portrait of his late wife. "Catherine would like you," he said softly. Scarlet turned to him. "How do you know?" "Because you aren't afraid of the dark," Gabriel answered, his eyes still on the picture. Catherine wasn't either. She was the only one who dared step into my world and bring light with her. And you, Scarlet, you did the same. You walked into this tomb and turned it into a home. Catherine would love you for that. The house wasn't silent anymore. It wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect. But it had a heartbeat. It had breath. It had the sound of Mama and Dada at 3 in the morning. It had broken laughter and unsteady footsteps. It had life. And that was everything Gabriel Stone, the silent king, had ever prayed for without daring to believe he could have it. A family. Not by blood, not by contracts, by presence, by hands that once wanted to let go, now holding tight. By love, the one thing you can't buy, can't steal, can't control. You can only give it, and receive it back. The story of Gabriel and Scarlet teaches us a precious lesson about life, that it's never too late to begin again, never too late to heal the wounds inside the heart. That family isn't defined only by blood, but by love, care, and the daily choice to be present for one another. That sometimes the greatest miracles come from the places we least expect, and strangers can become the dearest people in our lives if we open our hearts. Thank you for following this story all the way to the very end. If you felt this story touch your heart, please hit the like button and share this video with the people you love. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more moving stories every day. We'd truly love to hear how you feel. What did this story make you think about? Have you ever experienced similar healing moments in your own life? Leave a comment below, share the thoughts from the deepest part of your heart, and we'll read every line. We wish everyone watching this video strong health, a life filled with joy, and peace every day. Remember, no matter how painful your past has been, the future is always wide open for those who dare to keep going. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.